skills and like.
Oops, I'm sorry.
Phenomenal to see this year's cohort and those were insane presentations. So I don't think there's any here, but again, I'm just going to go. So today I will be talking about archiving web-based museum technology. And I have a bit of a disclaimer. So I currently work on digital collections manager at Newfields, which was previously the Indianapolis Museum of Art. But prior to being in that position, I was the archivist at the museum for 3.5 years. But we did not have a web archiving program. We barely had a foreign digital archiving program and still are working on that. But we were kind of thrust into the web archiving arena as we transitioned to a whole new brand identity from the Indianapolis Museum of Art to Newfields, and I'll talk more about that later. But so I was kind of new to this. I'm not an official expert on web archiving, but luckily there are so many resources online where you can really dive deep and learn a lot, and I'm going to do my best to give a broad overview today and then go into our specific case study, which I think ended up being pretty interesting. So as an overview, and apologies if you are familiar with this already, but I felt it necessary since I'm not familiar with any other web archiving sessions at MCN in recent years. But web archiving is exactly what it sounds like, the process of collecting, preserving, and most importantly, continuing to provide access to content on the web, or that more importantly was on the web and is no longer available. Obviously, websites, blogs, social media pages and feeds are very important. But for museums, there's a lot of time-based content that we create online all the time that may go away accidentally or necessarily. Or whether it actually goes away, it might still be live, but just nowhere on your site links to it anymore, so it's effectively dead to the web. Like exhibition-related websites, gallery interactives, we're moving to a lot of web-based gallery interactives, and then even some tour applications that we have can be web-based. And a lot of these tend to go away over time or be superseded. So why should museums archive the web? I do want to say that one of the reasons that they're here is to actively collect web resources that fit into your collection scope. That's not what I'm talking about here today. There's a lot of really interesting projects and a lot of opportunities, history museums, artworks, where our collections could be supplemented by web-based materials. But I'm focusing here on institutional content. So for us, it was important to meet specific records retention requirements, so that we're meeting our legal, fiscal responsibilities, and also just to capture important institutional content that's an extension of our physical and Born Digital Archives program. So our web content is just as important as the documentation being created each day. Also to document online events and public responses to events, because you can go outside of your institutional sphere to capture people's reactions to things and bring it into a single web archive as well to provide even more context about the thing that's your institutional content that you're documenting. And the final example is combat link rot, whether that is just incidental link rot and individual pages going away, or entire websites because you've redesigned and created a brand new amazing website. Who currently archives the web? Unfortunately, not many museums. So I think it's growing, but we need to keep spreading the word. Not surprisingly, it's mostly colleges and universities, major research universities with special collections and archives programs. Generally, most institutions with archives programs are archiving their website. But also others are archiving content from other organizations and individuals, and some are archiving both. We are now archiving both, though our venture started with just our immediate need for our institutional content. So types of web archiving. There are 3 types of web archiving. The one that I will be focusing on today for our case study, and the one that you'll hear most about, is client-side. So that is just archiving a site that's freely available on the web. Crawlers will start from what you set up as a seed page to say start from here, this domain, usually a home page. And then you can set parameters based on what tool you're using to then iteratively crawl, follow the links essentially through the website. If a page exists but it's not linked to from anywhere, a crawler could miss it. That's why sitemaps can be very important. It's kind of a side note about good web design practices is if you provide a sitemap, even though a page might not be linked to from anywhere else in the future, if it's on the sitemap, it can still be crawled. You can capture documents, text pages, data, images, audio, video files. It all gets captured and packaged. But web domains, they can set robots.txt exclusions on their website, so we all have the choice to do that too if we're worried about certain content being crawled. Though I think museums are pretty open, so I doubt we'd do much of that. Now the other two types of web archiving actually involve server-side archiving, so you have to be working with whoever are the domain owners. You'd think if you're archiving your institutional content, you'd want to do one of these other two options, but there's actually a lot of barriers, lack of benefits to doing either of these two methods, like transaction-based. This kind of web archiving actually just records transactions between users and the server, so if a page is not interacted with, it doesn't end up getting archived. This is a very uncommon type of web archiving. And server-side web archiving is essentially just creating a copy of that file structure on your server. It's a challenge then afterward to make the content actually usable, navigable as it was originally presented online. So even though it's great, you have complete access to everything that was there, parts that might be inaccessible to web crawlers, it's really hard to emulate that after the fact. So client-side web archiving, this is a super simplified diagram of what this looks like, featuring our old IME dashboard. But essentially, whatever crawling tool that you use will go into the website and really capture all of the different pieces of content, whether it be audio, video, the data, the HTML, the CSS, all of the pieces that make up your site. And it ends up getting packaged ideally in this web archive file format, a work file. And it's a flat file that literally contains everything, and you end up playing it through what are called like web players after the fact. Is anyone here familiar with the Wayback Machine? A lot of people, yeah. So the Wayback Machine is pretty famous. It's one of the earliest web archiving projects started by the Internet Archive in 2001. And it serendipitously captures a lot of content on the web. So the good news is if you have past content that you're realizing now you didn't archive, which we have a lot of that, it may have been incidentally captured by the Wayback Machine, and you can still then get control of it as a web archive and get it into a player, and you can provide access to it in a reading room or just in your museum, and I'll talk about that later on because we've actually gone back and archived our IMA dashboard. Let's see. They also do allow you, if you go to the main website for the Wayback Machine, there is a Save Page Now feature, so you could go in and put in a URL that you really wanted to capture, just some one-off captures, but it's nothing comprehensive like actually having a web archiving program at your institution. As far as web archiving tools and services go, Archiveit is pretty much king at this point, for better or worse. It's a phenomenal tool. It is subscription-based. When we were researching the feasibility of subscribing to Archiveit, I think the minimum subscription was $2,000 per year. So they make it pretty accessible, but that still is a budget, budget item that you have to advocate for. So it's great. It handles everything from the capture. You set up all the seeds you want. How often do you want them to be crawled? How deep do you want the crawl to go? And it will all just do it automatically. There's a bit of a catch in that is when you have these automatic crawlers, it's great, it saves you time, but then the captures, it might miss some of that harder to get content like videos and audio. And so I know a lot of users of Archiveit have started to supplement their Archiveit captures with more manual captures using Web Recorder, and that's the tool that I use, so I'll be talking a lot about it. Also, I do want to shout out to the New York Art Resources Consortium, which is the Frick, the Brooklyn Museum, and MoMA, and their libraries and archives have a phenomenal program just in general to provide better access to art and library resources, but they also have a great web archiving program, and they use Archiveit. They're a key Archiveit partner, and they have received funding in the past, I believe from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and so they're doing great work, and I would check them out.
But as far as local web archiving, if you're not doing a service that's being provided to you, this was from the 2016 National Digital Stewardship Alliance survey. There's a lot of different tools being used. We prefer web recorder, that's what we ended up with, that's from 2016. I would imagine that the use of web recorder's probably gone up as Rhizome has significantly put a lot of resources into that product. So here's a list of just some web crawlers you can use. I do want to point out HTTrack, that specifically will just copy a file directory to your computer. We did investigate that. And then these other three here, Heritrix, WorkProx, and wget, they can get WARC files, which is really what is prescribed for archives. That's the best standard. And then if you have web archive files, you're going to need a way to play them, and these are four different tools that can play web archive files where you put them in and it completely emulates that live website experience. So Web Recorder is an open source tool. They provide both options. You have Web Recorder itself to record pages on the web, and then they provide Web Recorder Player, which is the playback system. You can operate the web recorder through the online interface, through the website. Anybody can go to it and create an account, or you can also install it, which is what we did, because you are limited to 5 gigabytes currently online, and that was not nearly enough to capture our whole website. But so I installed it locally from the GitHub and just changed a few config files to up the storage like 100 gigs, like some crazy 5,000 gigs, just an arbitrary number, so I wouldn't at all reach the limit. But those are 2 ways that you can use it. Okay, so I'll go into my case study and then I'm really going to demo the tools that we use instead of just talking about them. So I mentioned briefly, we went through, and some people in this room might be aware of it, we were the Indianapolis Museum of Art. That was our identity. We still have the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and that's still a key part of who we are and what we do. But we are situated on a 152-acre campus with 100 acres of art and nature park, a historic property. We have another historic property in Columbus, Indiana, the Miller House, and we have 52 plus acres of historic gardens. So because we were not leveraging all of those assets, and people were saying, well, I always mean to go to the museum. Oh, I didn't know you had all of this. If I knew I could go outside and hike or see the art, I would have been doing that. I'm just not a museum person. So we became New Fields. And we have all these different entities there. With branding our campus as New Fields, we need a website for New Fields, which featured all of those different pieces that we are. So imamuseum.org was replaced by discovernewfields.org, our new website, and when that went live in April of last year, imamuseum.org was effectively dead to the internet, because you can't leave it up running as much as you have great content there, because people will go to that site and be confused or get outdated information. So we set up a redirect, so anyone going to imamuseum.org naturally would need to be redirected to discovernewfields.org. So, in evaluating and planning for that, a small group of us were really advocating for web archiving, that we really wanted to capture what was at imamuseum.org, and we had a strong case. It wasn't just all of the content on the main site, but we had a really important blog that had been live from 2007 to 2014 with thousands of articles. And even though it was no longer active, it was at imamuseum.org/blog, so the redirect would capture all of those pages too, and they would no longer be accessible. I ran a tool that I would recommend. It's called SiteSpider Mark II. It's a Chrome plugin. I'll demo it here. Once you install it, if you're using Chrome, it becomes one of the apps you have available to you. And from whatever website you want to crawl, so I did this for imamuseum.org, you set a few parameters. Start at this domain, restrict to this domain, though I did set the parameter that I would allow it to follow one link beyond to see where all of our pages link to, but then I didn't want to crawl all those entire sites too. I didn't need to check CSS or images or any scripts that were on there, and I wanted to avoid links with arguments, so this is important, like search results or calendar pages, so you're not capturing just all the arbitrary possibly searched pages. And once you start scanning, it will start with the first page, so it's spidering that, and you'll see the queue keeps going up, and that's how many links it's finding on each of those pages, and essentially it queues all of those linked to pages to check them all. And whenever it can't get to one of the pages, I have some other results here. It will let you know if there are any errors that come up. HTTP 403, 405s. I was particularly interested, of course, in 404s because that's dead content. It will let you know what documents are there and what it skipped. So that was a really important tool for me to use, totally free, just to get a sense of the vastness of what we needed to archive before it went dead. Our site spider results were a total of 13,600 plus pages, 7,000 plus of which were our blog, 2,003 JPEG images, 455 PDFs, 3 MP3s, 828 HTTP status 404s. A lot of those were links to past magazine articles and press releases. A lot of those just, I guess, got dropped from our file server at some point. But then we also had some important discovery of a number of exhibition microsites that were effectively not really accessible from our site anymore, except for one link incidentally on an exhibition page kind of buried, and 2 subsequent blogs that I hadn't been aware of because they predated my time at the museum. But we had residencies for 2 summers where artists lived on our island in the middle of our lake. And so we wanted to capture those blogs too. So we had to try a few things, see what tool we wanted to use. We tried httrack, and again, that just copies your file server, and you start from the index.html file to then recreate that experience. But the second I went to that HTML index file, I could tell that httrack wasn't going to cut it. It wasn't capturing our images. All of the slider down at the bottom here was supposed to have images as well, so that was not possible. We investigated Archive It, awesome tool, would have loved to use it, but we didn't have any budget for this project. It wasn't budgeted, so couldn't do that. And so that is when we landed on Web Recorder. And so I will demo that. Web Recorder, it looks a bit different from when I did it. Rhizome's really investing a lot in this product right now and growing it. I'm curious to see, I will say right now, it's free for 5 gigabytes, and you can always install it and run it locally for free from their GitHub. But I do anticipate they will have some sort of subscription service based on how much storage you would like to use through their server. They've been really generous with us as an early adopter and given us 50 gigabytes at this point, which is all we've needed, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to pay them for that generosity in the future, and hopefully it'll be minimal compared to Archive It, since we still don't have a huge budget for this. But I will show you, even without an account, you can get on Web Recorder's main website, which is just webrecorder.io, and put in a URL and start capturing. Just kind of get a feel for what it was like. So this is what I started, and so it'll play the website within Web Recorder, and you'll see there's an uptick here next to where it says it's capturing, and that will show you how much content, the size of what it's captured so far. And so you can kind of stay on a page until you see that flat line and then go on to the next thing. The important thing with Web Recorder is that you really need to interact with any of the content on the page if you want to make sure it gets captured, like playing videos or playing audio files. You don't need to watch the entire video, but it needs to load fully so that it's being captured. And then the key, and so I will mention, if you haven't figured out, this is manual capturing, so it's kind of crazy. We did this on the scale for an entire website, but the quality is also unmatched, and it's why Archive It users tend to go to Web Recorder to really get in, play videos, make sure they're getting captured, and then they just take those WARCs out of Web Recorder and they add it to their Archive It collection. And so also there was a bit of confidence. We had such a short amount of time. We had complete control over this, unlike with httrack, or even if we'd used Archive It to make sure we captured every single piece of the site that we prioritized for capture. But you just kind of go through the website. The storage amount used will continue to tick up. So here's an event page, and go to another event page, and it loads and keeps ticking. And then once you're done with your session, and you can go on for however long you want, it will show you how many pages you've captured. So I just did 3, our home page, and then those 2 random events. Gives you a timestamp. And then, so this is now where I'm gonna click on it. This is me replaying what I recorded. So this is not the live website, but the font loaded. So sometimes you'll see like that font took a second. If I hadn't let it load and capture fully, that font might not have been captured. But it's a great tool, it gives you what you need, but it was a huge time investment in the scope of our project. But we were able to do it for free, which was great, and they gave us extra space, which is awesome, and we've had a lot of back and forths and been able to get feedback because they've completely redesigned since we did it, so I've really appreciated that. So I will show you what our account looks like. If you go to webrecorder.io/IMA Museum, this is what you'll find. We only have 2 collections at this time, which is imamuseum.org, of course, and the IMA dashboard. The main page for imamuseum.org, we can put a little blurb and describe what we've got going on, and then create special lists in the collection. So since there's so much content on the whole website, we broke it down into more digestible bits, like homepage, the about, and it essentially reflected our site navigation from our main menu. Past exhibitions is a key one because those no longer are represented on discovernewfields.org, unfortunately, so we do have a lot of content that lives here that either hasn't made it over onto discovernewfields.org or won't, like the blog. I'm not going to completely recreate that blog. It had its time, it lived, it's great, and we are dedicated to providing access to it through the web archive going forward. But so I'm replaying our old website. If I actually tried to go to any of these, I would just get redirected to our new homepage. Because it's all in the same collection, I can go anywhere in here and it will replay all the old pages. It's exactly as though you were on imamuseum.org, so it's a really great experience for our users and researchers. And if you want to see the collection index, then it's the same thing, all of the captures with the timestamp. So we successfully captured imamuseum.org. It's been great. Our marketing staff still goes back and uses it to transfer content over. Our curatorial staff points to it to complain about how they want more content on the new site, and I love it. I encourage all of them to advocate for all of the content we want to get over. There's just so much that used to live on the site because it lasted for 10 years, so to get it all on the new site, it's an uphill battle, but we're chipping away, and this web archive really is how we're able to get it back and see how that was faithfully represented and recreate it with our new brand. Unfortunately, we did not do this for the IMA dashboard, which was such an important project for us. But as I mentioned, the Wayback Machine might have captured things like this. And actually for the dashboard.imamuseum.org, it had many, many captures over a long time. And so what we've begun to do is to build this collection up in Web Recorder. And not only that, but I've been able to add related content. So in this web archive, you can find a museum in the webpage about the IMA dashboard. We had 3 IMA blog posts that Rob Stein wrote about transparency in museums and projects like that. So we're able to not just provide access to the dashboard, but also provide it in this other context of how the feedback it was receiving, commentary about it, even capturing comments that went on in the bottom. Even back to the day when it started to say, the dashboard is not up to date anymore, what's going on? That was a real struggle. But we're still working through this and kind of going through all of the dates that are here through the Internet Archive. So we're working our way up, and all it takes to get one of these captures into Web Recorder is to view the capture in the Internet Archive. We check to make sure that it's of a date range that we haven't captured. Maybe it's showing some statistics that we haven't gotten before. And all you have to do is copy the URL from the Internet Archive. And let me log in. I can do a new session, paste in the Wayback Machine capture, and it's already recognizing that it's an Internet Archive work. And so it gives me the details about when it was, from April 2012, and you then just extract that content from their work file and bring it into your web archive. So it's not the most ideal. I mean, the ideal would have been we were web archiving the entire way, but a lot of places weren't. So we can retroactively provide access to this dashboard and make it coming from our perspective, providing the extra context that we want, and making sure it's as complete as possible. And the last thing I want to leave you with is some guidelines for making your websites preservable, which is a key thing, and we haven't necessarily thought through some of those things, so now this is more on our radar and we're really starting to incorporate it into what we're doing. But making sure that you are providing standard links to all website content. So single page applications are great, but then you have to realize that those aren't very web archivable. Avoiding proprietary formats for important content, especially on the homepage or other main sites on your page, including the sitemap, as I mentioned. Be pretty generous with your robots.txt exclusions if you need to have any. Make sure your URLs are stable and that you redirect them when it becomes necessary to. And then also in your headers, correctly identifying character encoding. There's a lot more tips you can find online, but these are just some of the main ones. Thanks. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
So in particular, I was really bummed when Storify was kaput. I was using that mostly for like tweet threads or like if we had an Insta-meet at the museum and I wanted to capture all the Instagram posts that came in. And it was also nice because it was in a link that I could easily share out again to people, being like, remember when we did this whole thing. Is any one of those tools or a different tool something that you'd recommend for that kind of thing?
So does Storify just not actively exist anymore, or is that old content also gone?
So we had to kind of like go back through individual like URLs for the tweets and like build our own to archive it. But yeah, Storify itself is like defunct.
Yeah. I mean, because ideally it would be great to be able to actually just capture them as is, but if you have kind of recreated them in any way, it's always a good idea to capture those things. We're kind of in the same boat with Flickr. I mean, we don't actively use it anymore, but it did provide public access to a lot of our content that otherwise is not available, and we are considering, do we want to recapture that just so that that those images in context publicly available, we have a record of it. But I'm not super sure about Storify if you can go back retroactively. It is always worth checking the Wayback Machine on the off chance that those pages got crawled, because it's kind of random and it's just based on the SEO of the pages or if they're being visited a lot.
Thanks.
You kind of got to it in the last part of your slide, but I wondered if you had any conversations with the technical team at Newfields about starting to implement some of those guidelines for preservable websites.
Yes, so I work on the Newfields Lab team, so they're my close colleagues. Patrick and Ezra are our main developers on the website, and they're really open to a lot of these things. It's great, and also things like making sure we have schema.org markup on all of our pages. Like they're very open to this, and so they're aware. I don't think I've annoyed them yet too much, but whenever stuff like this comes up, I try to make sure it's on their radar. It might not be the first thing that they consider, but then when they're like really revisiting the website, they kind of are adding these things to their checklists going forward.
Just a little question about the timing of this. I mean, you obviously did this because you were going through a transition.
Yeah.
But this would clearly also be a thing useful to revisit over time. What is your ideal time frame for redoing this process?
So we are actually, and it's just not a live collection yet, but we have started creating captures of discovernewfields.org, and so it's kind of a little task force with our archivist and library department, and myself for the most part, but then we also get feedback from the tech team when necessary, the curatorial staff, and marketing as well, because we like to start capturing our social media. And so a lot of cultural institutions now, they have collecting documents, collection management and plans for web archiving. And so those kinds of documents will say, okay, we crawl this, this, and this, and these things will crawl monthly. These things we only need to crawl quarterly because the content doesn't change much. Social media, maybe you do that every week. And then you just have to follow through with it and set up your tools. So we are actually now actively capturing discovernewfields.org as it changes, which ideally we would have done for imamuseum.org. In theory, we could go and grab the Wayback Machine captures and create a site of that, though, of those captures to show how imamuseum.org did change. But at the very least, we got this one static capture of it before it died.
That was a really great presentation.
Thanks.
Is there any specific examples of what you're doing with all the things you've archived? Are they being presented anywhere or?
Not yet. This is the first presentation. I'm hoping to do more. It seemed like this conference was ripe for it. I go to Society of American Archivists every year, and they would be like, "This is old hat. Why are you talking to us about web archiving?" Which is crazy, which is why I want more museums to do it. But we're starting, I think we're going to try to present it locally too, just for smaller institutions in Indianapolis area. Our archives also has a separate web recorder account, and so we have this really important art organization that actually just folded at the end of last year, and so we captured their website. We're having conversations about whether we should capture artist websites, just like we capture their ephemera that get sent to the library and put into our artist files. Should we have then a corresponding web archive of artist and gallery websites and event pages, their Facebook accounts? But once you start getting into that realm, which is why I didn't mention it exclusively, my focus here is institutional memory and content. You do need to really work with those content creators, make sure they're aware and okay. Usually they are super excited to have you capturing their content and making it part of your research collections, usually. Okay, oh, we're over by 2 minutes, so I'm happy to stick around if anyone wants to talk to me or have some business cards. Thanks for coming. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
great.
gosh.
Yes. Have you seen this photo?